Well, maybe if your sermons weren't so boring, maybe people would feel that way.
This is the One Accord Podcast, and on today's episode of the Biblical Theology Project, we are discussing Numbers chapter 9 and 10, and I'm looking forward to getting into the material with the usual team, so let's go ahead and bring them in one by one. Eric, we'll start with you, since last time we just made your day by having you go first. How you doing today, my friend?
Well, now that I'm first, I'm doing fantastic, and looking forward to the episode like I always am, and I'm really enjoying hearing your guys' perspectives, interacting with you. So we'll see how it goes.
That's right. You said, I think last time, if I remember correctly, every time we talk about the Bible, Greg teaches you something every single time. Am I remembering that right?
I'm enlightened every time without exception.
Every time without exception. So surely this will not fail to stop the pattern. Brother Greg, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Hoping to be last, because you know what they say about those who are last.
They shall be first.
Yeah.
I think I remember somewhere reading that somewhere. And demerit for you, right off the bat. We didn't even introduce Micah, and you already got a demerit.
That's always looking to beat me down. Well played.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and bring in Micah. Micah, how are you today?
I'm doing well. I too feel something every time Greg talks, but I don't know if enlightenment is what you'd call it. But other than that, I'm doing well.
I really want to hear the word that you would use to describe
it. No, you don't.
I'm on the edge of my seat for it. We'd have to use our bleep button for the first time ever. This is a family show, guys. All right, come on. Well, it's good to see you all, and I'm excited to talk about these couple of chapters with you guys today. As we've read through it, of course, we have some things that we want to discuss. If you're watching this, we'd encourage, if you're not familiar with these chapters, go ahead and press pause now and maybe just take a few minutes to read through them so that you're familiar with every single verse and all the words that are there, because we're not going to read all of it out loud on camera, but we have done that so that we can talk about it, and you'll get the most from our conversation if you are familiar with these chapters as well. But which of you guys wants to get us started? I know that we've got a couple of interesting things to talk about. So who's champing at the bit, ready to start our conversation off today?
I'm actually chomping at the bit.
That's a callback for those longtime viewers, all 6 of them or whatever.
Right. Yeah. So as I was reading verses 9 through 14, God makes an exception for those who cannot observe the Passover at the prescribed time. And so the prescribed time was the first month, 14th day. What is the exception that he makes, and what does this reveal about the way that God deals with his people?
Nobody wants to answer that one. Well, if they were unclean, that was one of the exceptions. There was some people who were unclean through the normal course of their life, and so they wanted to know what to do, and Moses sought the Lord, and they got another alternative. So I think it's pretty cool that they weren't excluded, but as far as I remember, it was just simply for those who were unclean, and not for any, I don't remember another reason.
Or on a distant journey.
Oh, a distant journey, yes, there was.
So, so those people who, through life circumstances, or at least those 2 life circumstances, could not participate.
Well, it shows the mercy of God too, right? Because, I mean, people aren't being excluded just from circumstances that are out of their control. You know, that you happen to be on a journey, and then they say, "Oh, well, we're gonna have the Passover." What's interesting is that this is the first commemorative Passover. The only Passover that's happened so far is the Passover out of Egypt, the actual event, where the angel of the Lord passes over because of the blood of the Lamb. This is the first commemorative Passover, but. And not celebrating would have had severe consequences. Nobody is getting those consequences just because of like circumstances in their lives that would have excluded them from it. So I think it points to God's mercy toward his people.
Yeah, that's kind of the impression I got. I think that's clearly what's being seen here. I like how God he's reasonable and understanding. And if someone is going through some type of life situation or the circumstances are outside their control, God doesn't hold that against them. People can't be expected to do the impossible, and they're not sovereign. Only God is sovereign. So there are things that we just can't control, and if someone dies suddenly beside us, or if a family member dies and the person becomes unclean because of that, then obviously they can't control that. Or if they're away on a journey and they can't make it home in time for some reason, God understands these things, and so He allowed them to observe the Passover during the second month, on the 14th day of the month, just 1 month later. So I just thought that was really, it's like God, it's like He's a real person, and we all know that already. But He's understanding. He's reasonable with His people, and He doesn't expect them or require them to do the impossible, things that are beyond their control. So I really appreciated that about Him.
I completely agree with what you're saying. I would just like to use, and I'm doing it for a reason, I would like to use the word compassionate here. Understandable, reasonable. Yeah, those are all good words. And the only reason I'm doing so, there's a teaching that persists or is out there in Christianity that wants to make compassion more of a human trait than it is a something that originates in God. And so when I see this as, yes, understanding, yes, reasonable. I would just put this more in the compassionate, graceful, merciful category, just to combat other things, which I don't think you're arguing against at all. It's just that would be the word that I would choose there.
Do you think most people make God out just to be like distant and uncaring? Is that what you mean? Or
I've come across enough teaching out of realms that I would generally agree with, even that downplay compassion and turn that into a human characteristic less than a godly characteristic. And so, yeah.
Are you talking about like people that would advocate for, I don't know how versed you guys are in this conversation, but the classical attributes of God, where there's like a high view of impassibility, where God is not a being that has passions? Is that what you're referring to, Greg?
I think
that's what I assumed he was talking about.
Yeah, I wasn't referring specifically to that, but as you say that, the view that I'm thinking of and I can't talk about the things that I'm the explicit references because I would have to break the rules.
I'm not trying to bait you to get.
Yeah, and I know you're not, and that's why I'm being hesitant because I can't give you examples. But yeah, I'm quite certain that the reason they have those views, at least in part, stems from people who hold to impassibility and whatnot.
That's interesting. You hang out in different circles than I do, and I
am one of those people.
Yeah. Didn't we have an episode about that? Did we talk about?
We've talked about it quite a bit
back in the systematic theology portions of our conversation.
I mean, my interaction with those camps is mostly through reading theology textbooks. I don't have as many conversations, it sounds like, for you. So I was just surprised by that kind of as a statement. Most people I talk to definitely view God as merciful and compassionate, and that comes out in a lot of at least the conversations I have. So I appreciate you bringing that up. I was going to ask a follow up, to Eric's, because I thought you stated it very well, especially about the inability that we would have, right? We don't have power over life and death. And so if a near relative dies and we make ourselves unclean because of this near family member, of course we have no opportunity to do anything about that. That's completely outside of our control. And so the question that they asked Moses is very reasonable. What are we supposed to do? I mean, we just don't get to participate in the Passover? The distant journey one, though, because you said the phrase, like things we don't have any control over. Don't they have a control over a journey? Like this is an interesting provision in that regard, in which I don't think that this comes up. Certainly we haven't seen it for any of the other festivals. Of course, as Micah said, this is the first commemorative one, so perhaps that would come up later. But the idea of being on a distant journey, especially as they're all wandering together in the wilderness, this is an interesting caveat that doesn't seem to me to be exactly the same. I have no control over the life and death of myself or anybody else. I do have at least some control over choosing when to take a long journey and then understanding whether or not I'm going to make it back in time to participate in the pilgrimage festival. So that one seems like it does have more opportunity for us to have some control over. So I don't know. I guess maybe I push back a little bit on that part of your explanation, or I'd be curious to hear what the rest of you guys think about what is the nature of these long journeys that God is anticipating in this answer.
A long journey that only allows for a month window, right? So, I mean, I think there's a possibility that I head off on a journey, my camel breaks down, and I've got to,
Camel gets a flat tire or something.
Exactly. And so I could see how, hey, listen, I plan to be back, but I'm a week late because of the broken down camel. That gives me that month leeway right there. Our travel and our ability to schedule travel looks a lot different today than it did, I assume, with the broken down camel. To be a lot different than it was back then.
Right.
That's fair.
Sure.
There are all sorts of contingencies that could lengthen your time away from home that genuinely might be outside of your control. Or for instance, like what if you're visiting relatives in a distant land and then, like one of them dies, while you're there? Is that going to lengthen your time there? Probably. Something happens, like your camel breaks its knee, something like that. Obviously, there's any number of things that could have happened that aren't just poor planning or planning that deliberately sets aside the importance of the Passover.
Would you think that someone who has just poor planning, that this would still apply, or do you think that would maybe nullify, right? Because
I think they get to, but I think
I don't think God's happy with them.
Yeah,
for
I don't think it's great, but it's like it's not a great reason.
I guess lawfully is what I'm saying. Like you could crash the second celebration, I suppose, but like, is it according to the spirit of the law that God is giving? Was I guess the question that I was asking.
That's kind of originally what I was saying is I think I said something like, if you're on a journey and you're intending to come back at the appropriate time where you can participate in the festival, but yet, like these guys already said, something unforeseen happens, something that you didn't anticipate happens. That would be, I think God would accept that. I think that's the idea here. But if someone's just being careless and, they could have got back in time, but they chose not to. Well, obviously that's in violation of the spirit of the law. So I would say that I'm talking about unforeseen, unanticipated things that are beyond anyone's control.
And I think Joe's follow-up question leads well into one that I wanted to ask. As we read this and as the people are asking for this backup date, I get the impression that they really wanted to participate in this, that this was something that they really look forward to and wanted to do, which, I don't know, maybe we'll come to a point where the people don't have that anticipation or that desire. But so this is more of a question about how we look at this. As we look back, it seems to me that generally speaking, as we modern day 21st century Christians look back on this, we talk about, they had to do this and they had to do that. Thoughts on our attitudes versus what I think are the good attitudes right here in the text towards people wanting to participate in these things, is so much so they're like, listen, if outside of our ability, if we can't, can we have that makeup date? Thoughts on that?
That's a good observation and a good question. Passover, the nature of Passover is one of celebration. Passover was meant to be a celebration. It was a reminder of God's judgment on the Egyptians and his mercy on the firstborn of Israel and all of Israel. And after, like we already know, after putting the blood on the doorposts and lintel of their houses, they were protected from the destroyer, to use Exodus 12:23 language. And also the Passover was a reminder of Israel's exodus from Egypt, which was obviously a monumental event in the nation's history. It was kind of like almost like Independence Day. The nation Israel was breaking free from Egyptian bondage. They were heading out on their own. So these things were reasons to celebrate, and you can see why people would want to participate in the Passover, since it was a celebration of all these things. And I think that missing it would have been very disappointing. It's not identical, but it's comparable to like an American celebrating the 4th of July. Again, the 4th of July is much less than Passover, obviously, but we're celebrating essentially our Independence Day. And so the Passover was like them kind of becoming independent from the Egyptians. So this is something that I can see everybody really wanting to participate in.
So in a similar sense, now, not all these dates are for the same reason, but it seems to me that all the Sabbath, all the feasts, you could make a similar argument for all of those. And why wouldn't we want to participate? Why wouldn't the people have wanted to participate in that? So why do we adopt this perspective that says, oh, they had to do that, and they had to go and, celebrate this festival or that festival? Joe, you're laughing. Why?
I do think it's funny. I mean, I'm on record. You guys know very well that I'm not much of a holiday guy. I'm really bah humbug about a lot of holidays. So you would expect that maybe my attitude towards these things would be like, oh my goodness, they got to do all this stuff. I actually read these things and I go, yeah, that actually sounds pretty good. Like, I think that this sounds like a better system than what we've got. And it's funny to me because most people I talk to, they love holidays, but then they read about these holidays and go, oh, they had to do this. So that's just what's making me laugh.
Yeah, you're making my point, I think.
Yeah. I do think people have a generally pessimistic view about the Old Testament in general. They view the law that way. They view, these forced celebrations and forced Sabbaths and whatever as this burdensome, terrible, awful thing. But I don't know. It doesn't. What we're getting now doesn't seem to be that, right? They're being brought out of slavery, being brought into their own land. God's giving them a law so that they can be prosperous and blessed. That's what the intentions are, and this is part of that. And remembering what God has done. But human nature, of course, makes it very easy for us to turn anything. I say that now. If I lived in this culture, I imagine eventually, because I know my own flesh, I'd be like, oh, brother, we got to go do this thing again. And that's something I have to fight against in my own spiritual sanctification.
Well, and I think that, you see people's attitudes like this toward even just going to church on the Lord's Day. I think people see that as a barrier to what they would rather be doing. The people here wanted to celebrate the Passover. They're actually asking the question, how is it fair that we have to miss this? Like, what if we had that attitude toward, like the one day where we're supposed to gather to worship the Lord's name and to celebrate his glory? And what if we had that attitude toward that day? Like, it's not fair that maybe, circumstances would cause me to miss this.
Well, maybe if your sermons weren't so boring, maybe people would feel that.
That's probably my fault. You're right. This is why I tell people about when Greg talks.
Yeah. I'm starting to see it.
I felt like I had to punch back
clear.
after that. I was like, I got to find a way to hit back.
See, maybe we could say, you've missed the Sunday opportunity, but we've provided this midweek opportunity for you, just if you were unfortunately unable to make it. But yeah, it is funny how I don't know, it's like a universal human experience that our flesh does long after things that just aren't as good for us, and maybe it is easier sometimes for me, I'm just speaking for myself, to read this and go, oh yeah, that I actually see the beauty in this because I'm not participating in it. But then, I don't know. I don't want to run ahead and get demerits. I see that so often. You guys all know, like, it's easy for us to criticize the people that we read about and then not really apply those things to ourselves. But yeah, why? Our flesh wants the same things. Like, of course, I know I should be delighted, and all of God's people should be delighted to gather and worship. One of the biggest criticisms I ever hear, though, for our particular local context, is to go, the church service is just too long. You go, I know, it's really asking a lot for us to give God, just a couple hours. It's like, this. Give me a break. Like, what else? And I don't know. Are we even gonna? People think, I'm no longer talking about just our context, but like, do people really want to go to heaven? I've asked this question. Like, when someone complains, we sang too many worship songs. Like, you're gonna hate heaven. Like, you're gonna hate it. We're gonna sing God's praises forever and ever and ever, and you can barely stomach 5 songs. If we hit a 6th, you're like rolling your eyes and can't wait to get out of here because you got to, what do you got to do? To listen to Taylor Swift instead? They're not going to be listening to Taylor Swift in heaven. So
it's an odd choice.
Wasn't she popular? I'm trying to update my pop culture references. If I said the songs that I actually know of, I thoroughly plant my flag in the late 90s. So I've been told that every time I make a pop culture reference, I make myself seem like an ancient dinosaur by my children. So I tried to reach for something more relevant, and I maybe failed again. So sorry about that.
No, you're good, brother.
Yeah, I think that there's an aspect of God's punishment, and this isn't all of it because I don't think people want the torment that is going to be hell. But there is an aspect of God's eternal judgment where he is giving them what they want. He's not bringing people to heaven that don't want to be in heaven. Now, like, people go too far with that and they try to lessen the severity of hell and lessen the torments, and I'm not doing any of that. But what I am suggesting is that corporate worship is supposed to be a down payment of heavenly glory. Or you could even go like festivals like this. It's supposed to be a down payment of the glory that's ahead of you. Do you want it? That's I think a good question for everyone to ask.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I'm not trying to be judgmental, and I know these things can sound judgmental. I mean that. Like, as I look inwardly in my own flesh, do I really want these things that have been given to us to be a picture of what it means to really love the Lord and to worship Him? Or do I find in my own flesh a clinging to the things that are clearly not part of that, right? Do I want all the worldliness that, quite frankly, I have no reasonable expectation that these things will endure into eternity, right? And I think those are appropriate questions for us to ask ourselves, and I don't say it to beat people up. I know lots of pastors as well as lots of other, non-professional ministry people who as Sunday approaches, they're not excited about it. That's why it is refreshing to read about these guys. They're like, hey, we want to participate. But your point is a good one. This is the first commemorative one. I wonder if that endured a decade in, 2 decades in. And it seems like there's some laws again about making sure that you're not abusing the system. And, Greg, your question I think was a good one. I have a follow-up to that. It just seems like, and I already kind of asked it, but this second chance only seems to me like it was for legitimate reasons. Like, I don't think that God was giving people an out to say, okay, well, we can just skip the first one because now there's a second one. Like, I think the intention was we should really be striving to do everything that we can to participate on this appointed time, on the first month, on the 14th day. And if circumstances outside of your control make it impossible, you do have 1 month of leeway, 1 second opportunity. But it's not like, I don't really feel like it, or I'm going to work my fields, or I'm going to, pretend like I'm on this journey, or I'm going to, stay longer. And then God gave me this other opportunity. At least that's the way I read it. Do you guys think I'm being too harsh? Because again, Greg, you used compassion and mercy, but I don't think that this was like a loophole that they were allowed to just kind of presume upon that, I guess, but maybe you read it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. What I see from the text is someone wanting to participate and grieved by the fact that based upon circumstances outside of their control, they can't. And so they want a makeup date or another opportunity. And so, could this and will this probably create a loophole for somebody who doesn't have this attitude, who just like, hey, can I just get out of this, or can I go do something? I'm sure that could be abused in that way, and it probably was abused in that way moving forward. And so, yeah, I want to use this as an example, as a proper example and not an improper example. And so, I like the fact that there are people here going, no, listen, I want to do this thing. But it's outside of my own control. I can't. Lord, can you graciously, mercifully, compassionately offer me another opportunity? And then I'm going to do everything in my power to hit that date so that I don't have to wait a whole nother year.
Well, and the text plainly answers your question, Joe. Numbers 9:13 says, but the man who is clean and is not on a journey and yet neglects to observe the Passover, that person shall then be cut off from this people, for he did not present the offering of the Lord at his appointed time. That man will bear his sin. So it just plainly says, if you don't have these reasons, you're cut off. You are required to observe this. So there it is.
It's interesting when we see how severe the penalties are, right? I mean, that's related to the question. Like, as a parent, right, it would be so odd to be like, listen, kids, you have to go to the birthday party, or you give like this.
Or you're going to the orphanage,
right? So I think it does speak. It does speak to the severity of our tendency in the flesh, that this particular attitude that is being expressed, that these particular people who are unclean this time, is not the general sentiment that will always be there. Like, although this is a blessing, although this is a good thing, although it's part of the mercy and compassion of God, and it should be a celebration of this mighty act of God when he did something incredible by making them a people and bringing them out of slavery in Egypt, bringing them through the Red Sea, preserving them from judgment of the firstborn, all this that's tied up into it still has to be threatened with this very severe warning. And it's incredible as just a commentary on the nature of human beings and our desire to resist the good things that God has offered.
You mean you don't have to threaten your kids upon pain of punishment to take their birthday presents? He's like, I'm trying to give you a gift. And you're like, no.
I've never played the orphanage card as Eric was
Really?
on the tip.
You totally should try that one. It works great.
Is that one effective? My goodness. Oh, brother.
Well, I think,
you got to follow through, though.
Yeah.
Well, I think that we have I'm speaking for myself too, we have such a strong tendency to become apathetic toward the things of God. It can happen so quickly. One day we're on fire for God. The next day we're getting caught up with something that just doesn't really matter. I think we have to fight against apathy regularly and submit to God. And I even say we're required to enjoy the presence of God. But we have to train ourselves to do that.
I wish it were just apathy at times, right? Like apathy is one thing, but it goes beyond apathy, I think, to just, I don't want to sometimes. Like it's not that I don't care about not going to church. I just don't want to do it sometimes, which is worse than apathy.
Do you have any idea why? Is it just because sin dwells in our flesh? Or I mean, is there any insight as you look at your own? I'm not trying to be, I don't know, have you sitting on the psychoanalyst couch or something, but I mean, is there any, you said it, can you identify anything in you that makes it move beyond apathy to even almost contempt, or just saying, I don't want, because I know it's a good thing.
Yeah. Oh yeah. 100%. I think it's so situational, right? Like, yesterday morning, I'm not saying that this happened yesterday morning, but yesterday morning would have been a good example, right? I spent from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Dropping trees Saturday night. My kids came in and woke me up at 2:00 in the morning. I almost slept until 5. I got intermittent sleep till 5, and I was up from 5 on. I was exhausted. I didn't feel good. I was so tired. I just didn't want to go to church yesterday. Now, that's not contempt towards church. It's just like, I'm so exhausted. I don't feel good. I would rather go to sleep. And so now I know that attitude's wrong, but it's not contempt towards the church. I just didn't want to do it yesterday. But it was what it was. And I bucked up and manned up and went and worshiped God and tried to worship with a whole heart. And I'm sure I fell a little short. But there's an example.
That's fair. I appreciate that.
I think though that there's a difference between, well, let me state it like this. This is probably more clear. I don't think God expects us to be thrilled about every single thing that he's requiring us to do. Is it ideal that we be thrilled about it? Absolutely, it's ideal. But I think I can't always control my feelings about something, but I can control what I choose to do about it. So you were dead tired. You made yourself go to church anyway, and you tried to make the best of it. I think that is, that's the better thing to do rather than just say, well, I just don't feel good.
Yeah.
I'm
sure it's home. The better thing. There's so many verses I want to quote right now.
I know. And there's verses on my mind too, but it's like, how much control do we have over the way that we feel? I mean, yeah, I think we do really have some control over that. I don't think we can just, in the blink of an eye, make ourselves excited about something. I think we just, I think we have to. It's the Christian life. A lot of it is just acted.
It's human condition, right? And so we not going to quote anything. I discipline myself so that I can, in sanctification, worship God more correctly. Hopefully, I don't think I directly quoted anything there.
No demerits.
So I think that we have to recover the differentiation between affections and emotions, because when older theologians talked about affections, they weren't just talking about what you feel. They were talking about the disposition of your soul and what you're inclined to, those dispositions that incline you toward what you're going to do. So Greg is saying there might be days when I don't feel in my emotions, whether it's physically, like emotionally, whatever. I don't feel like doing this thing. But the fact that he still did it shows that there is an overruling affection or an overruling disposition to obey God despite how he feels. We totally take out in our modern world because of expressive individualism. We totally rip out the discussion of dying to your emotions, because your emotions are king. Your emotions expressing sort of what you feel at any given moment. That's who you truly are. Well, not really according to the Bible. You can't trust your heart. Actually, you can't trust your emotions all the time. They're going to lie to you. There's something deeper than that, and that's affections. That's how has God worked in you to point you in a certain direction despite how you're feeling at any given moment.
It's interesting to think about the severity. We've talked about it briefly with some of the other passages in the law, but the severity of these things. Let's say I had a night like Greg had, and I wake up and I feel a little groggy. I'm like, I'm thinking about not going. Oh, if I don't go, I'll be cut off and I'll bear my sin. This is a pretty significant punishment. And so it kind of is a motivator to say, well, all things considered, I'd rather not be cut off from my people. And so I'm just going to kind of go ahead and do this anyway. And there is a grace in that, I think, that, again, probably the non-believer, it's impossible for them to see it. And, oh, your God, can only be worshipped under threats. That's not what is being said. Or at least not all that's being said. But, in the modern context, and of course, I'm not arguing for severe penalties for people who don't come to church or something like that. But, think of, because of all of the absence, there is literally no repercussion whatsoever for most people to miss church. And so, of course, you're going to see people who will miss more often. And it's just going to be the way that it is. And there will be all sorts of reasons that are just, over time can become less and less and less even understandable. We just don't do it because it was moderately inconvenient. And this severity of what God was installing, again, was for benefit, was for good, to do that which is truly better. But it is I do think a commentary on the depths of our fallenness. And the depths of the rebellion that still dwells in us, that we resist that which is good to try and strive after what seems right in our own eyes. And it's disappointing to me, again, speaking just of myself, even as I just reflect on my own life, it's disappointing to me how much I know that my flesh longs for things that are literally trying to kill me. Like it's a weird thing, and how much resistance, even when my mind knows it's right, even when my heart can know that it's right, when I'm reading, that still my flesh it still wants certain things that are terrible. And it's a weird thing to see. And I understand why the non-believer tries to then, in their emotional, state, says the things that I want must be good, and the things that I long after, they must be, pure and valuable. And anybody who would tell me to resist those, desires is telling me to go against who I am. But man, these things are trying to kill us, and God is offering us life. That's at least the biblical picture that's there. And I see it. Like I say, I don't want to pick on them. It seems like a strong, Eric, you read the verse, which does answer this question very directly. It seems like a severe penalty for, take your birthday present or you're cut off. It's a weird dichotomy. But anyway, you guys have anything else on this? I have one other question, but it'll kind of take us in a slightly different direction. All right. So in verses 11 and 12, we're reading a little bit about some of these instructions. We're getting a repeat of some stuff that we read back in Exodus chapter 12, particularly verses 8 through 11 and 43 to 46. Did you guys have any thoughts on kind of what's repeated? There are some things that aren't repeated from Exodus 12. And then a related question, when we read in Exodus 12, there was a provision that forbade any uncircumcised person from eating the Passover. But Numbers 9:14 then says that aliens could participate, those who were sojourning against them. So, I
sojourning with them, not against them.
I'm sorry, not against them. Sojourning with them. Is this some people would say that this is a contradiction. Is this saying that these aliens were circumcised and under the law to some degree? Or is this a different provision? Has something changed? I guess I'm just curious on your guys' thoughts on these details here.
Well, as far as the repetition in verses 11 and 12, this looks like a summary of those things in Exodus chapter 12. And the end of verse 12 actually says, according to all the statute of the Passover, they shall observe it. And so you get the impression that verses 11 and 12 are not meant to be an exhaustive. The instructions aren't meant to be exhaustive. They're intended to be a reminder. And this implies that the information in Exodus had already been written down. And God is referring back to those things that were already written down in Exodus chapter 12. And the same basic idea, I think, applies to Numbers 9:14. Even though circumcision isn't mentioned here, it is in Exodus 12:48, which Numbers 9 is referring back to. So I think that they must have already had the instructions in Exodus.
Whether it was written down or not, I'm not sure. But it seems clear to me that as I read Numbers here, that the backdrop of what's communicated in Exodus 12 is expected to be part of their understanding.
They knew about it already.
Oh yeah,
Clearly.
yeah, and so when I read in Exodus 12:48, as you pointed out, but if a stranger sojourns with you and celebrates the Passover to the Lord, so here we're getting this inclusive language already. Let all his males be circumcised. So when I read in Numbers, I assume the background understanding of what's been said here in Exodus is part of that. So those sojourners who are participating in the Passover presume circumcision of all the males.
Let me read something real quick. Exodus 17:14, it says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, write this in a book as a memorial and recite it to Joshua." This is just a simple observation. It seems like Moses was writing things down, prior to this. At least that's the impression that I get. But anyway, just a simple thing that adds a little bit of light to this.
Yeah, I agree that Moses was writing things down, even as God was giving the law to them at Sinai. But in both verses, or after both of those sections, both in verse 12 and in verse 14, it's the same language is repeated that Eric just read. Verse 14, regarding the sojourner who would keep the Passover to the Lord, according to the statute of the Passover and according to its rule, so shall he do. He is assuming a common body of revelation that's already in existence there. He's assuming prior instruction. So I don't think that you have to say, well, that this is Joe's not asking for himself whether this is a contradiction. So, but you don't have to say, well, this is a contradiction, or you also don't really have to say, well, circumstances have changed, so there's a deviation. No. He's assuming what has already been revealed.
It's almost as if most of the time when something seems contradictory, that maybe there's just a lack of understanding of the greater biblical context.
Wow,
weird. Yeah.
Who knew?
So
if I think I see a contradiction, I automatically assume the problem's with me. I think that's probably the best.
Oh, see, I thought if you see a contradiction, you automatically assume that the Bible's stupid, and then we should. No, sorry. Yeah, I'm with you. I agree. I agree that way. So I am always astonished at the amount of people that I talk to who have never read the Bible or have only read bits and pieces of it and think it's filled with contradictions. I'm like, man, I've been really reading it pretty seriously for 2 decades and I can't find any. But
and then when you ask them what the contradiction is, they don't have any idea, but they know they're there.
Or they'll list something like this, and it's like, well, you just don't understand the previous statute. That's why you think it's a contradiction. But anyway, yeah, good answer. So that's all I got. I appreciate that. It is it's important, as we're going through this Biblical Theology Project, to see why reading some stuff, it builds and it assumes previous knowledge and it keeps on going. It doesn't always give us everything again. And so if it says according to the previous statute, we sure have some responsibility to understand that previous statute so that we don't get ourselves confused.
So I had a question that I wanted to bring up, and it's specifically about verses 15 through 23. God makes it clear to them that they are only to move when the cloud, which by day rests over the tabernacle, it's fire by night, when the cloud picks up or lifts itself up and moves ahead of them. I wondered if you guys thought, what is being communicated about the relationship between Yahweh and his people? Because it seems to me that they're in a totally passive position here. They don't do anything unless he tells them. They don't do anything unless they don't move unless he moves first. What's being communicated there? What are your thoughts?
I guess when I think about this, I understand what you're saying about passive. I prefer the term dependent. There's so many things that there aren't to be passive about, but to me, this communicates. It's a beautiful picture of the people's dependence upon God, in such a way that, I don't wish for the past, but man, would it be nice to be able to look up and see that cloud and go, yeah, I know I'm going the right way. I know I'm making the right choice. Why? Because I'm just following the cloud, and it's right there, and I can't miss it, and it just is what it is. I would say that in a similar sense, I am dependent upon God, but things aren't always as clear as I want them to. They're not as clear as the cloud heading that way, and so that's the way I'm going to go.
Yeah, I've joked before that I wish that, I've even kind of prayed this way, which I know probably sounds silly to some people, but I was like, God, if you would be pleased to just, when I wake up in the morning, there's like a sticky note on the wall that I could just take, and it would just tell me all the, kind of like a honey-do list, but from God instead of from the world or my wife or anybody else. And I'd be like, man, these are the things I'm supposed to accomplish today. I'd really focus on these things. That sure would make a lot of things a lot easier and clearer. And so, of course, I know that we do have everything that we need, but it is a little bit more, it's a little bit more active on our part. We really have to seek it out. But I would, your language this does seem a little bit more passive. We're just kind of waiting around. I'm sure that there's more to it, but we're just waiting to see if the cloud's moving today. If it is, then we're moving. If it isn't, then we're not. And that's a pretty clear thing. I wouldn't mind a few seasons like this in my own life and ministry, but maybe that's me being silly, I guess.
And I think what you point out is why I don't call it passive, right? Because there's a sense of us completely passive. That cloud can move, and I'm like, well, I'm just passively sitting here. It does still take. There is still a measure of faith. There is still a measure of obedience. There is still a measure of activeness involved there. And so I would just use the word dependent instead.
Yeah.
I know what you mean, and I'm not trying to kick back.
Yeah, no, I know. I guess maybe to clarify the language of passive, I mean, they're a recipient of God's clear revelation. And what I was thinking about as I was reading this is think about the sort of all the time posture you'd have to have in preparedness to obey. Because you wake up every day and you don't know where that thing's going. You could be moving today. You could not be moving today. You have to be ready to drop everything at the drop of a hat or the lifting of a cloud. You have to be ready to move at any given moment, right? There's a posture of immediate obedience that is assumed there. That we may not be getting special revelation from God all the time. I think at all anymore, but that's a different conversation.
I was going to say, are you getting it some of the time?
Yeah, I was saying.
But I do think that this points to this readiness to obey that we're supposed to have. God says to do something, you read something in God's word, immediately apply it. You don't need to wait for the right time. No, you should be always looking to obey the Lord.
Yeah, that is the view, though, that many people take. We read it and then we just wait for that strong backwind from the Lord to move us along and propel us. So I'll just kind of sit here until he not only shows me where I'm supposed to go, but carries me along with him.
Well, and they had very good reason to trust that the cloud was going to lead them in the right direction. First of all, they'd been leading them with the cloud by day and the pillar of fire at night. And he led them that way out of Egypt, and he took them to the Red Sea. And when the Egyptians were coming toward them, he got in between the Israelites and the Egyptians, so the Egyptians couldn't annihilate them. And then he parted the Red Sea and then took them through on dry ground and rescued them. It did this impossible thing to bring them out of the land. After that, I think I'd go, you know what? Wherever that cloud's going, I think I'm going to go the same way.
But instead, and yet they grumbled against the Lord, right?
Of course, of course.
Which says something about us as people, because I'm not convinced that every one of us wouldn't have been part of that grumbling crowd at any point.
We probably, we have the tendency to be that way for sure.
Yeah.
So I have a question about Numbers chapter 10. Numbers 10. Let's move into Numbers chapter 10. And I have a question about the silver trumpets. God instructed Moses to use silver trumpets for various reasons. This is mentioned in verses 1 through 10 of chapter 10. And I was wondering, what does verse 9 mean when it says, "Then you shall sound an alarm with the trumpets, that you may be remembered before the Lord your God and be saved from your enemies. My question is, why were the trumpets necessary to get the Lord's attention? Like, didn't God know when the enemies were coming? Why did they have to sound the trumpet to get the Lord's attention? And Greg, why don't you lead us off?
Oh goodness. Okay. Yeah. Again, I feel like I'm picking at nits all day today, and I'm not trying to. So when I read this, I don't really see it as getting the Lord's attention. I think as I read this, I think back to Genesis 9, was verse 15, which says, when he sees the rainbow in the clouds, he will remember the covenant. So and back then we talked about this wasn't God forgetting and then, remembering when he sees this, but, and so I see this very similar. So getting his attention, I don't know that I'd phrase it that way. But this was part of the process. God used this like he used the bow in the clouds.
Yeah. So the trumpets were used for a number of things here. They were used to gather the children of Israel. They were used to gather the chiefs. The alarm specifically is used to indicate that they're going to set out on their journey. And then once they come into the land, the trumpets are to be blown when they're going up in war against an adversary. I think that the trumpets appear to be some kind of a public prayer or invocation of God's protection and blessing. It's not that, they need to get God's attention. And I know that's not what Eric's saying. But it does seem that it's a public demonstration that we need the Lord who fights for us to go before us. And I think that that's even indicated at the end of chapter 10 in verses 35 and 36. And whenever the ark set out, so this would presumably be when the trumpets have blown. Whenever the ark set out, Moses said, "Arise, O Lord, and let your enemies be scattered. Let those who hate you flee before you." And when it rested, he said, "Return, O Lord, to the 10,000 thousands of Israel." So it's coupled with a prayer there. I think it's some sort of a public invocation.
Joe, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, these questions about God remembering, certainly it's not, the way that we read this is not to intend that God is some forgetful deity up there and he needs to be reminded. But it speaks, I think, of just that God will be faithful. And so if they'll do the things that God commands them to do, God will be faithful to do the things that he said he will remember. And so I guess the question is, will they remember to do this? Will they do these things? But if they will, then God will remember to do his part. And so I don't know, it kind of is interesting when people use a verse like this or think, and we've had that conversation before, so I don't know that I have any really new thoughts. But yeah, this invocation language, Mike, as you were just saying, they were to do this. It called to what God's purpose was with them, and if they would do these things, they could trust that God would continue, just as you were just saying, the cloud has led them faithfully so far. He'll continue to lead them faithfully as they go forward. So there's some battles ahead. We mentioned that, I think, in our last episode. God delivered them without really them having to fight. Now there's, some fights that are going to have to happen. And so that does require a different level of faith, I suppose, to see God's faithfulness as he's going to act. He's not just going to deliver them like he did with the Egyptians. There's some different responsibility. But if they'll blow these trumpets, God will remember his part and he'll continue to lead them as he promised.
Yeah, I looked at it just very similar to what you guys are saying. I think the trumpet was really an act of faith because God commanded them to do this, and he promised to save them when they did. So blowing the trumpet was trusting God to keep his word and to save Israel from their enemies. I think it was, it's like similar to offerings. When you give an offering, you're doing it because God told you to do it, and because he said, if you do this, then your sins will be forgiven. Now that's, again, I know there's more to it, and we don't need to, I realize it's not just simply the act itself, but it's combining it with faith. I'm trusting that, okay, God told me to do this, and he said, if I do this, I'm going to get a certain result. He's going to produce the result. And so I trust that he's going to keep his word and that things are going to go well when I choose to obey him.
Yeah. Your faith is in God, not in the trumpets.
Right,
but
exactly.
God told you to do trumpets, so you do the trumpets, but your faith is in God. Likewise with the sacrifices. Your faith isn't in the sacrifices. It's in God. And that's a nuance that a lot of people really don't realize. They think that maybe it's this mechanistic thing. It isn't. And that's why just blowing trumpets won't deliver them if God tells them not to, or offering sacrifices that God didn't prescribe, or in a way that he didn't tell them to do it is nothing. Faith in God is the main point. So I think you articulated very well. I agree 100%.
I got another question from chapter 10, and this is a person that hasn't come up yet that I know of, but in verses 29 through 32, Moses asked Hobab, the son of Reuel, Moses' father-in-law, to come with Israel into Canaan. We all remember Reuel from earlier chapters, the father-in-law of Moses, who gave Moses wise counsel and he seemed almost like a godsend, like he was really helping Moses lead the people. So why did Moses want Hobab to come with Israel? What do you guys think about that?
It seems to me, and I'm looking at verse 31, where he says, and you will be as eyes for us. From what I have in the text here, it seems to me that Reuel was somebody particularly insightful, or maybe had wisdom that Moses valued. And so while we aren't told explicitly, this apparently this man had something valuable to offer to Moses and to the people of Israel, and so Moses didn't want to separate from him.
So I have a question about that answer, Greg. What would you say to the person who said, "Well, I thought that the cloud was supposed to tell them where they were supposed to camp, but now Moses is relying on the wisdom of Hobab because." Verse 31, you know where we should camp in the wilderness. You know where we should camp in the wilderness, and you will be as eyes for us. So a skeptic might come to you and say, well, I thought the cloud was showing them, but now Moses seems to be depending on Hobab. What do you think about that?
And this is right after the cloud thing.
This is, immediately after. So I want to know how you'd answer the skeptic there, or how any one of you would answer the skeptic there.
Well, I've already answered, so I'll pass.
Yeah, that's.
He was asking you a follow-up question,
but I'm gonna
you're deflecting.
Well, in all fairness, Greg was kind of put on the spot a little bit there, but I follow-up questions are fair. So.
Micah, do you read this as a possible shortcoming in Moses' faith, that he is maybe relying a little bit on the arm of the flesh here to have a sensible human element as this? I know that you're kind of giving this question in the mouth of a skeptic, but is this possibly in your reading a hedging of bets by Moses, or a lack of faith?
There are a couple of possibilities. I think that's a possibility, but I'm less confident about that than just. I think it's perfectly fine if, like, the cloud. We have no idea how big this cloud was. The cloud departs and into this sort of general area, and then maybe there was certain elements of wisdom for where in that area and how exactly they were to position this camp. Obviously, the general setup of the camp, God gives that, but I don't think that they're inherently contradictory. Even if Moses is not hedging his bets here, I think that there's a way that those two things fit together. We have no idea how big the cloud was. The cloud could have just been giving them an area. So I think there are a lot of explanation too.
I think there are a lot of practical things that could be going unsaid. You're talking about how big the cloud is, or the details. And I guess I'm going to generally ascribe that to this situation. It's my impression that if Moses were doing something disobedient or something unpleasing or showing particular unfaithfulness to God, that the text would have handled it that way. Now, the text seems very neutral about this. It's the way I read it anyways. And so I'm just going to assume there were some background details that I don't have, that the text wouldn't have explicitly pointed this out as a negative, especially in light of other negatives that we see when the leaders fail. The text has had no problem saying, and this was not a good thing. The text treats this very neutrally, so I'm willing to just assume that there are some details here that Hobab was being asked to address, that Moses wasn't being unfaithful in doing so.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good answer. I think the callback, especially there's this relation with Reuel, or and I think we established that we think this is Jethro, the same person, just by different names. Although there's different views of that. But I think when we talked about this before, that was kind of where we settled. You guys can correct me if I'm remembering incorrectly. But certainly, Eric, as you mentioned previously, that interaction, God had given them stuff to do, and they were trying to do it. But Moses did rely, thankfully, on some of that human wisdom that wasn't contrary to what God had said. It was just he kind of was allowed to unburden himself a little bit and still be in the counsel of the Lord, but then also having some human wisdom. And so if there's been some demonstration previously, and now we're getting this call back here, it seems like Moses, I think this is, unless I was misunderstanding you, Greg, kind of along the lines of the sentiment, God's given us instruction, but there's also some human wisdom here that would be valuable. And I think that was kind of where you were headed anyway with your answer as well, Micah, that, this person is familiar with the territory. So maybe if that cloud gets really going and we kind of lose sight of it, we know we're headed that way. But this is someone who at least knows the terrain and the territory and can give us a general idea of, navigating out here. And so, I get a picture as we were reading through this that, of course, God gives them details, but maybe not every detail. And there is some element of human wisdom that as we're, trying to skillfully walk with the Lord, that we can benefit from, wise members of the community. And certainly if this person has some wisdom, having them leave would be a loss to some degree. That's not to diminish what they have with God's leading, but, the value of other human fellowship and again, I keep using the word wisdom, but just the ability to confer with others doesn't ever seem like that's been a bad thing.
Yeah, to bring some current events into it, right? Just last week we lost Vody Bacham, went home to be with the Lord, and as people, I've seen this, as some people have expressed their grief and remorse over the fact of losing him, I've seen other Christians come in and go, "Well, we have everything we need. You shouldn't be lamenting the loss of this brother. God is sufficient." Well, yeah, it's my impression, as I'm just going to assume good motives behind people who are expressing their grief and remorse. None of them, so far as I know, are relying on Vody Bacham for salvation, but he was, in my opinion, I don't agree with everything he ever said, but he was a wise, godly man, and I think that we are worse off or handicapped in some way not having him, because he was a blessing to so many, in my opinion.
God decrees, I'm going to get really, really Calvinisty here. God decrees the ends as well as the means. So he does give us exceptional people that have extraordinary amounts of wisdom for a reason, to bring about his decreed ends. And those aren't necessarily against his supernatural workings and things like that. They can work in tandem with it. And then something else in this text specifically that I think goes into that is, and what Joe just said kind of alerted me to this. It appears to me that the pattern here was that the cloud goes out and the ark leads. The ark leads in the following of the cloud. And I think that you can see that in chapter 10, verses 33 and 34. So they set out from the mount of the Lord 3 days' journey, and the ark of the covenant of the Lord went before them 3 days' journey to seek out a resting place for them. And the cloud of the Lord was over them by day, whenever they set out from the camp. So it seems that at least the ark of the Lord was significantly ahead of them, like it's by days. So maybe you would.
Well, I get that in the reading before. I think maybe it was last week's reading. The ark would set out so far in advance, then the vanguard would leave so far in advance that the tent would be set up by the time people got there. And so, I think we are talking about such a train of people that it's possible people could, not take the right path or misstep in some way.
Yeah, I think I'm going to be less specific than you guys, just make a broader point. But it seems to me like God never really intended to micromanage things in such a way where no one had any input or ability to use their own wisdom in it at all. I think it seems like, and I think, to some extent, Micah, I think you're right when you say that, God, whoever's there, God is giving Moses and others people to work with. Like we already talked about Jethro. Jethro was there, and Jethro gave Moses wisdom to use, and Moses used it, and it seemed to be a blessing. And now you have Hobab, who is Moses is to some extent relying on to figure out where they need to go exactly in the land. And interestingly enough, we don't ever get Hobab's response. We don't get a yes or no. It just sort of ends, and we don't know what he agreed to and what he didn't, or whether he left to go back home or whether he stayed. So we don't even know what happened to him. But it seems like God had people there who apparently he had enough confidence in to give some good advice. Jethro, Hobab, and no doubt there were other people too. And there's even lesser leaders like tribal leaders and others. So I think God delegates certain responsibilities. He gives certain people a certain amount of influence that they can use to make these kinds of decisions. So anyway, that's just my broader point, to be less specific.
Well, and so there's a question that's sort of related to that regarding Hobab and Jethro's family. In Exodus chapter 18, we're told that Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard of all that God had done for Moses and for Israel, his people, how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. And then, obviously, Jethro goes and visits them there. And by the time you come to the end of chapter 18, after Moses and Jethro speak a long time about how Moses should proceed in judging the people, verse 27 says, then Moses let his father-in-law depart, and he went away to his own country. It appears that Hobab is trying to do something similar here, which is just Moses' brother-in-law. Hobab is trying to depart from the children of Israel as well. My question is, obviously, the surrounding nations had heard of the fame of the God of Israel because of how he defeated Egypt. My question is, what spiritual status do you think we should ascribe to people like Jethro's family, who they appear to have some form of not total allegiance to Israel, because they're not, I think, becoming circumcised. They're not joining them permanently. They're coming and expressing some sort of friendly relationship with them, and then they leave later on. What do you think that says about their spiritual status? Do you think they are what we would call? Do you think they are what we would call saved because of what God reveals about himself in the Exodus event? Like, is there allegiance to the one true God now, or are they just sort of friendly pagans?
We talked a little bit about this when we covered Exodus 18, and we also talked a little bit more about it when we covered Leviticus 16. So for our viewers, if you want to watch those episodes, we covered that in a little bit more detail there. But so we only have so much information to work with. Based on what Exodus 18 says about Jethro, it makes me think that Jethro became a worshiper of the one true God. Now, maybe he already was prior to that. It says he was a priest. I think is how it's worded. He's a priest of Midian. And I don't get the impression from reading that he was some kind of pagan priest. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe he was. But it seems like if he was pagan, and the whole point of the Exodus was to separate Israel from paganism, it seems odd that he would be allowed to tag along and allowed to exercise this kind of influence if he was a pagan. Actually, it makes it sound like if he was a pagan, he would have been thrown out of there pretty quickly. So I get the impression that Jethro and Hobab were probably either they were worshipers of the one true God all along, or they became worshipers of God once they saw what happened with the Exodus. So that's, I don't know. I'm working with very limited information, and so I'm just giving my best guess based on what I know about these guys so far.
Yeah, again, I'm going to fall kind of in line with Eric. While the text doesn't give me any explicit judgment on them one way or the other, it seems to be treating them in a very, if not neutral, almost positive sense. And so it appears to me, as I read the text, that while these people these individuals didn't connect themselves permanently, or at least in the case of Jethro, didn't connect himself with Israel permanently, there was still, it appears to be, some faith expressed by them, some trusting of God and some allegiance to God, whether or not there was permanent connection to the people. And so, not my job to assign salvation status, but it appears by what I see from the text, they believed and trusted in the Lord. And so, as much as I can, I would say, yeah, it seems to me, whether or not they are permanently members of Israel, they expressed faith in God. So
I have nothing, distinct or definitive. Any answer that I would give, I would put in the speculative category for sure. And questions like these, I think, are very interesting ones. It'll be very interesting to see, when we wake up, and are in that great multitude, who's there. I guess we can keep an eye out and see if we see Jethro or Hobab.
Joe's going to do a census when we get up there. It's like, I knew it.
Yeah,
I knew that person wasn't going to make it.
You can ask these questions. Without a statement of their spiritual state, we only can go by their behavior. And, I imagine as we continue to go through the Bible, we'll see some people that God tells us that their spiritual state is what we would consider saved, but their behavior is very poor. So if we were judging based on their behavior alone, then that would not be a good thing. It is an interesting... The evidence that you guys said, I would just say that seems to be the best. Like the fact that they're allowed to continue, the fact that Moses wants them to continue, the fact that as God is speaking directly to Moses and he doesn't say, why do you still have this Hobab guy? Get him out of here. Like, the fact that isn't addressed, I feel like that silence speaks volumes, and that there is an understanding that this is not kind of a mingling of, all right, we're trying to walk, with the true and living God, but then there's also this competing pagan influence that's also trying to lead us. I feel like God would make it very clear, and so the absence of that. But I also know the danger of speculating from trying to reason from silence. So again, I still would classify that as speculative on my part. But what do you think, Micah? You're asking the questions, so you have thoughts?
Yeah, those were basically my thoughts. The text does treat them in an incredibly positive light, and I think that I think that it's interesting that they're not required to become Jewish. They're not required to formally join. If in fact they are genuinely saved, they are genuinely worshipers of the one true God. It's interesting that they seem to leave with God's blessing. They seem to leave in a very positive light, and I think that it's assumed that they continue worshiping the one true God. So I think that's interesting, just in terms of the universality of God's saving purpose among all the nations.
As you read it, I think Hobab stays, doesn't he? Isn't that how you would interpret it?
Jethro.
Yeah.
I guess when they leave, I'm speaking of Jethro.
Yeah, sorry, Jethro. Okay, gotcha. And while the text doesn't say in particular, again, a bit ambiguous, I'm under the assumption that if Hobab did stay, that he went ahead and got circumcised. But again, that's very speculative, but it's how I speculate it.
Unless he was treated like a sojourner that was just around, but wasn't participating in the festivals and things like that.
Yep.
But
that's a possibility too. But sojourning like that,
he was so close.
As I read the
Moses,
sweep of the text, I'm just assuming.
I agree.
Acknowledging that it's an assumption.
As close as he was to Moses, you would think that he probably, I don't know, I'm assuming maybe wrongly that he was circumcised, but I don't know.
We're in the same boat, at least on this one.
Well, friends, that is going to be our show for today on Numbers 9 through 10. That's what stands out to us. That's what we think. What do you think? What stands out to you? Go ahead and let us know in the comments below if you agree with us, or if you disagree with us, or if there's something that stands out that we didn't discuss that you think is worth paying attention to. And if you have some thoughts, we'd love to read your comments down below. If you haven't subscribed, we would encourage you to maybe click that subscribe button. And if you enjoyed the episode, click the thumbs up button. We've got a lot more episodes to go on our Biblical Theology Project, and so I will look forward to gathering with these guys again in 1 week. And friends, until we see you again, we hope that you'll get equipped, that you'll obey your king, and that you'll glorify your God.
Wow. Who knew?